It is a long weekend here for us in Canada. So Dan Mahar and I thought of taking the weekend off and just replaying last year's episode of the OHL podcast from this time because, oh, you poor Oshawa Generals and you poor Oshawa Generals fans. But right to that in a moment. Quickly, if I may, as we get this started, I'll remind you that there is a 50-50 jackpot that you can get your fingers on if you just use your fingers to go to the website cf5050.ca, cf5050.ca. And if you go there and you're in Ontario, you can participate in the Farwell for Hire 50-50 raffle. This is in support of cystic fibrosis research. Cystic fibrosis is a cause that's near and dear to my heart. And this 50-50 raffle helps me raise money the easy way. All you have to do is buy a ticket. They start as little as $10. And if you buy before this coming Friday, May the 24th, you are eligible for a $1,000 cash early bird prize. Easy money if you go to cf5050.ca. The overall jackpot, though, holy moly, over $82,000. That's not bad money, no matter where you are. So check it out, cf5050.ca, with my thanks for making the fundraising easier when you go to that website and buy yourself a 50-50 ticket. Dan Mahar, I joked a little bit, and it's nobody in Oshawa is laughing. I'm sorry to the Durham region, but the Gens come out. They kind of bop the London Knights in the nose in game one of the OHL final. And then London says, so that's how you want to play this, eh? And 4 games later, it's done. Knights in 5 after a Knights sweep of the Gens in the last OHL final. And I think what we all expected to happen has now happened.
Yeah, I guess Oshawa's going to have to take solace in the fact they were the only team to get a win on the board against London. I mean, there's something there maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, watching that championship series, though, I don't know if you felt the same way, Farwell, but I really felt when Oshawa brought it back home to their building that's when it broke them. They came out flying. They, I think, had the first 10 shots of the game. They were looking great. London scored on 2 of their first 3, and we're up 2-0. And it just felt like, if you can outplay them, which is hard enough to do, and still come out of that period trailing by a couple of years, it just felt like in my views, it looked like they kind of lost some spirit there. And then the next game, it just seemed to be dominance from London. London had the confidence. They were rolling, almost toying with them from that point on. So yeah, it's a very slim margin of error you have when you're playing the London Knights, and we saw it in that series. And I think fans in Oshawa and Durham region just experienced what everyone else has been experiencing in the Western Conference all year, right?
No question about that. This team was, as described, a wagon, and they delivered as advertised. No question about it. I think it's interesting what you say about game 3, Dan, after the Gens win game 1 on the road, handing London the only loss they would suffer in these playoffs. Go back home with the split, so they lose game 2, but you got to feel pretty good getting the split, even though when you win the first, of course, you want them both. But I don't want to hang all of this on Jacob Oster by any stretch of the imagination. But I did find it rather telling that late in that third game, when the Gens made the late push, right? Brad Malone pulls the goalie with about 9 minutes to go to get 1 back. Suddenly, I think the Gens were down by only 2 then, and they continued fighting back. They were within 1, and they score with their net empty again to get within 1. And then Oster, let's just be honest, let in one that he should not have let in. On a rush off the wing, and all of a sudden they're down by 2 again. They get back within 1, the Gens do, and then when the Knights add an empty netter, what does Malone do but throw the rookie goaltender out there and leaves Oster on the bench? I couldn't help but think a little bit of a message was being sent, but listen, you're up against that wagon, as I just mentioned, and I'm not about to hang this all on Oster, but I bring it up because you look at how complete a team the London Knights are, because it's not over yet. We're in the OHL. The Knights are off to the Memorial Cup now. But what a contrast in goaltending. Like, everybody talked about the 13 NHL draft picks on the London Knights roster. And you and I did discuss a little bit Austin Elliott. This is a guy that gets waved through the dub picked up by Barry and sent to London for a song, and turns into a guy that loses one playoff game and two games in total through the regular season and playoffs in more than 40 appearances. Ridiculous.
It really is, and Mike, I was trying to put my finger on it because I had a bunch of fans asking me, what's this Elliott guy? Look at his numbers. What about him? What about him? And we talked about this. It's hard to kind of articulate because it's not the highest end goaltending prospect. He's not a huge guy. He's not a guy that's been on radar. I think he's committed to, I believe it's UMass Lowell next year, if I'm not mistaken. But he's going NCAA. So he had enough pedigree to get himself a ride there. But when you mentioned the Jacob Oster thing, it kind of dawned on me. So they put the rookie in, like you mentioned. Could just have been like message sending from Brad Malone, possibly. It could have been that his head just wasn't quite right at that time in the game based on what had just transpired. Who knows? But when you compare it to Austin Elliott, the thing that always stuck with me with Austin Elliott was, did he let in weak goals? Yeah, absolutely. Throughout the course of the year, but there were never. It seemed like there were never two. He never kind of gave the other team enough momentum to capitalize on. He kind of fixed it up after he had a brief moment of weakness where you see a lot of goalies in junior, and we saw it with the Gens in the finals. And again, I'm not pinning this on Jacob Oster in any way, but there were a few weaker variety, or the type that you'd love to see your goalie stop. And when you're playing a team that you describe as a wagon like the London Knights, it is extra disheartening when you give them a softie because you think, this team, we're going to have everything going right to beat this team. So if a softie occurs, it just brings the collective spirit down. And I just felt like Austin Elliott was, I don't know if he was just had that much confidence in the folks in front of him, or he's just that mentally strong. But yeah, he just finds a way to not compound the mistakes and be there for his team. And, quietly goalies like that sometimes end up with rings, and people kind of say, oh yeah, that guy, he didn't really jump off the page, but look at the numbers.
So the age old debate now begins, Dan, and it comes courtesy of an email from my buddy Tommy to OHL podcast at Rogers.com. Tom's a Kitchener transplant, now lives up in the central Frontenac's Quinte region of Ontario. I like to call it God's country out that way, but nonetheless, Tom sent an email following the Knights' victory. Keep in mind, this was London's eighth, count them, eighth appearance in the OHL championship in the past 19 championships. 8 out of 19, the Knights have been there, and now they've won 6 of those 8. And Tom says it's bad for the league. It's boring. Everybody knew at the beginning of the season this is how it was going to go. The age-old debate, of course, Dan, becomes dynasties. Are they good or bad for the sport? How do you feel about that?
Again, so there's a nuance here. I'd like with everything, right? So I don't want to not answer your question. I think the basically, if you just take it at its root, all things being equal, I think dynasties are good, and that it proves it can be done. It gives the other league something to strive for and shoot for, and should bring everybody's effort up. There is a caveat though, and I want to throw in there, and the caveat is as long as there's an even playing field. And I think that that's where a lot of folks in this league are starting to get concerns is it an even playing field? I know there's a lot of people out there listening to this that are going to laugh and say, of course it's not. London has access to X, Y, and Z, and a couple franchises have way more money and power to, it's never going to be an even playing field. And I get that there's some variability in how even things are, but I don't think it's good for the league to have a dynasty based on some unfair advantages off ice. And I'm not trying to get into taking anything away from London, but I think that will be what's in the back of a lot of folks' minds in this league when they watch it and say, "Well, yeah, London, is it possible to compete with them?" It's starting to feel a little bit like the LA Dodgers and Major League Baseball, where teams are like, "Well, yeah, any given year we might be able to give them a run, but really they're up here with payroll, they're up here with these other factors, and at some point." It's not good because teams lose their will to try and go up against that. So I know it's a long-winded answer. So I think all things being equal, dynasties can do wonders for the league, wonders for the marketing. But I think you have to be careful to make sure that the dynasty is that even playing field. It's based on how you built it.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up, unprompted, because I'm going to get to another email that we received that I think ties into something along the lines of what you're talking about. But quickly on the same question, I'm with you, Dan. I generally think, and I've gone back and forth on this in my lifetime of sports viewing and fandom, but generally speaking, I like dynasties now. I think it shows you what can be done, and look, the recipe is there for other teams to try to emulate if they would like to match what the London Knights have done, whatever you believe those ingredients to that recipe to be. But go ahead and fill your boots, or in this case, your skates, and try to do the same thing that London has done. But why I like dynasties, and I've said this on a number of occasions throughout the course of this season on the OHL podcast, I like the pursuit of excellence. As we said already on this episode, everybody knew from day one, from the end of last year's Memorial Cup when Saginaw scored with 22 seconds to go to beat the London Knights in the final. London was on this mission. And for them to come into a season and go through 68 regular season games and have the second best London Knights record in franchise history, and then go 16-1 through the playoffs to get to this point. They haven't finished it yet. They want that Memorial Cup, but to have that singular goal and pursue excellence at that level all season long, I think it's pretty damned impressive. And yes, that's why I tend to appreciate dynasties today.
Yeah.
I may not have appreciated them so much 20 or 30 years ago, but I certainly do today. To the point that you made, Dan, and I appreciate that point too, but our old buddy Johnny 807 sends an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com and says, among other things, I've been getting a kick out of reading fan reaction to London's victory these past few days, largely from salty Oshawa, Windsor, and especially Kitchener fans, all responding with some combination of the following: London cheated to get the win. The Hunters paid off the refs and or the commissioner to get the win, and the Hunters pay their players in general. Johnny takes this a step further, but I will say this, Dan, and I think you kind of nibbled at the edges of it, but wouldn't it be a whole hell of a lot harder to do that than just go out and be a dynasty and win like London has done?
I, Possibly, that's a good question.
Like if there
Possibly,
is skullduggery, right? If there is,
yeah.
and I want to use that word because it's a great word. If there was some sort of skullduggery, if there were shenanigans going on here in this day and age where it's more difficult than ever to keep a secret, wouldn't it be harder to do that and keep these secrets and find ways to manipulate the system or the game in order to win? That would have to be harder than actually winning, wouldn't it?
Oh, you would think so for sure. Yeah, I mean, and no one's going to sit here and start to throw accusations as though they're set in stone because no one has that. Like you said, there's what secrets are there that are being kept, and what information, what proof is there of these things? So no one can say that. I think what people see is a team that's consistently able to draw players, and we've heard the draft stories. I mean, everyone has them. Player said he'd only go to London or only to London and Windsor or Kitchener or whatever, but there's stuff that goes on in and around the draft. We know that. And whether it's London or not, we've heard players refusing to go to certain markets. And so around the draft and player recruitment acquisition, there's always been an imbalance. And some of it fair, some of it unfair. The fair, I mean, if you don't run your franchise well, you don't have a good coaching staff, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, of course a kid's not going to want to go there. Like if you're a gong show like Niagara has been, you're going to cost yourself in the recruitment department. Uh, but you don't want to see any of these kids isolate themselves to a certain franchise because of perks or other benefits they may get there. I look at London, and I mean, I keep coming back to the same thing. And yeah, fans are going to be salty, and that email of yeah, fans are going to be salty when they lose. Period. We know that. That's fandom, and it's a percentage of the fandom. They're particularly going to be salty when it's a team they don't like, and they don't like teams that are dynasties and play with a little bit of an edge, and after the whistle stuff and all those kinds of things. So yeah, the saltiness doesn't bother me at all. That's just part of the sport. But I keep coming back to with London, Mike, is they still, like you said, we said from day one they were going to be the favored team, and they executed all the way through, getting better as they went. So there's something that happens on ice, in the practices, in the game planning, in the teaching, that elevates them all the time. And that's an advantage any team can give itself if they do things properly. So it's tough to be mad at a team that improves their players. And I think for me, that's kind of the bottom line.
I will also remind folks that every good story needs a good villain. And you mentioned a moment ago, and we all know London likes to play with a bit of an edge, both physically and I think mentally. They've got a swagger about them. And without the London Knights being the heel in this story, being the villain, which is a role I know that the entire organization relishes, well, it's a less interesting league, quite frankly. So again, I will add that to my appreciation of dynasties today and just say every good story needs a good villain, and the OHL has a very good villain in the Forest City.
It's true, Mike, and I think you and I would be amongst the first to say that the NHL, in my mind anyway, was a bit better in years past when there were dynasties. I know not everyone wanted to see the Montreal Canadiens hoist the cup every year, or the New York Islanders, or the Edmonton Oilers. No one wants to see the same cup winner over and over, but it sure gave you that intrigue you just talked about, a good villain, something to shoot for, right? And it makes for a better story than just, a different winner every year because the cap has forced teams down and other teams up. So, yeah, I think dynasties can be good as long as they're built the right way.
Johnny's email goes on to say, after talking about those conspiracy theories he'd been hearing from salty fans, to ask the question, are there any other conspiracy theories around the Ontario Hockey League that we've become aware of over the years? Nothing jumped out at me offhand, Dan, but I don't know in the conversations you've been having if you've heard of any great conspiracy theory with any shred of substance to it over the years.
These every year there's a handful of rumors that make the rounds, and I will say this because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. For the most part, these conspiracy theories are unproven, unevidenced. They're saltiness from people that don't like certain teams or players. But I will say this: we would be naive to not know that things happen behind the scenes. Lots of stuff has happened where, players have been moved, things have happened that the public never understood why or how that deal came about or what was said. And so I don't know if I'd call it conspiracy theories, Mike. I don't think there's no one paying the refs. There's no one paying Brian Crawford in the commissioner's office. Those things are just kind of, I'm mad, I'm going to spout and just kind of sound nonsensical. But there are things that do happen around the league. We know that. Minor transactions here and there and things that occur that the fans will never know about. So there is some intrigue that happens, but I don't think anything I'd categorize as a conspiracy.
I do believe along those lines and deals that you raise an eyebrow over. I do believe it was the Kitchener Rangers and London Knights and the little nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Nazem Kadri deal back in the day, where the agreement was, you give us Steve Mason now, we'll give you Kadri next year after our championship run in Kitchener. And I think that's when the league kind of stepped in and say, guys, these handshake, nudge, nudge, wink, wink things should not be happening anymore, especially when they're so obvious. Again, I'm not quite sure it's conspiratorial, but to your point, yes, there are things going on behind the scenes and strings being pulled. And by that, neither Dan nor I mean envelopes of cash going to the commissioner or the referees. Like that's a full stop, ridiculous theory. You can be as salty as you want, but nobody's getting paid off to call a game one way or another. So just stop with that. The only thing that came to mind for me, and I wouldn't call it a conspiracy theory either, but it was a story that Scott Radley at the Hamilton Spectator raised almost 10 years ago now. And I loved it because Scott writes for the Hamilton Spectator. And one day he speculated aloud or pointed out aloud in a column in the Hamilton Spectator that the trophy for which the newspaper is named, no, the trophy, no, the newspaper, anyways, the Hamilton Spectator Trophy. So
Yes.
and it had never been. So he's writing for the paper that is the namesake of the trophy that is awarded. I'm getting this, okay? Stick with me. It's a long weekend here in Canada. That's awarded to the team with the most points every year. And Radley writes in the Spectator's like, nobody's ever seen the trophy. Does it actually exist? You look at these trophy cases in the league offices, nobody knows. He asks Phil Pritchard, the guy that's known best as the keeper of the Stanley Cup. Hey, Phil, where's the Hamilton Spectator Trophy? Phil's like, I don't know. It's probably at the league offices. So the thing was, the sucker had never been presented. And Scott Radley, writing in the Spectator, says, where the hell is the Hamilton Spectator Trophy? Turns out it was in storage. If you can think of Raiders of the Lost Ark at the very end when they take the crate into the huge warehouse full of crates. That's basically where the Hamilton Spectator Trophy had been, and somebody from the league offices sent Scott Radley a picture, and the mystery that had stood for decades was finally solved. Nobody had ever seen the trophy though, so there you go. Just a little fun story around the Ontario Hockey League.
So you're saying we just need Harrison Ford to figure this out for us?
and a fedora. Yes, we got
Yeah.
that, and we're all set. All right, something Dan and I are trying to figure out now that the OHL regular season is over. Oh, before I go too far onto that, we should just take a quick moment here, Dan. London obviously off to the Memorial Cup, where they will face host Rimouski, the Moncton Wildcats. Those are the two teams from the Q, and the Medicine Hat Tigers from the Dub. What do you suppose? And look, in fairness, we don't get to watch the Q or the Dub to any degree, but how do you figure London stacks up against these teams?
For me, it's at the top. And you're going to hear a lot of hype about the Medicine Hat Tigers, and they've got some high profile prospects, Gavin McKenna, Caden Lindstrom. They've got some players who will are marquee names, and they're going to get a lot of acclaim. You know my personal feelings on this, Mike. I feel like the WHL kind of gets overhyped a little bit, and the QMJHL a little underhyped. And often their reps come in and play terrific hockey and have won a couple in recent years. So I think look out for the QMJHL reps. I know it's the host Rimouski team is no slouch. They're earning their way in through the front door because now that them and Moncton are in this final series, they're both going. So they did it the right way. But for me, Mike, to answer your question, it's London. I don't know how it can't be London. Just everything they've done this year. When you lose one game in the playoffs against 100-point teams like Kitchener, and you beat the Oshawa was loaded for bear. I just don't know how it can't be that, Mike. They're you talked about the 13 drafted NHLers. For me, without having watched the other teams enough, and I'll admit that, usually I come into the tournament feeling like this team's the got the edge of that team. But this year, I feel like it's an OHL year.
Yeah, I have to feel the same. And you look at the London team from last year that's trying to avenge that loss. And who did they lose to? The other OHL team that was built like a wagon. The OHL tends to show well, and this is a loaded London team. Again, understanding we don't get the luxury of watching the WHL or the Q, but I feel exactly as you do, Dan, for the same reasons. We watched this team run roughshod over the OHL all season long. I think it's London's tourney to lose. Interesting. Looking back, and the point you made about the Dub really stands out to me, because if you look back to London's first Memorial Cup back in 2005, coincidentally won over Rimouski. That's who the Knights won their first championship over. There have been seven in the 18 years, including that first one that London won. 7 times the OHL has won the Memorial Cup. 8 times the Q has won the Memorial Cup. That leaves just 3 for the Dub in the past 18 Memorial Cup. So if you're cheering against London, it would look like Rimouski and or Moncton are your best bets to knock off the mighty London Knights.
Well, and I know when you look at the NHL playoffs, Mike, you look at what teams are still a contention and who their star players are. The themes I see: a lot of European players, a few NCAA players, a whole lot of OHL players, and a few Quebec players. But there's not too many teams being driven by those WHLers. And again, I'm not here to malign the WHL. I'm just saying when we evaluate these things, we might want to revisit our historical biases here, because I think there's a couple half decent players in Sidney Crosby and Nate McKinnon, and I remember what league they played in. Wasn't the W.
Excellent points by you, Mr. Mahar. Okay, before I got too far ahead of myself here, Dan and I have been talking now that the OHL season is over. What teams in each conference kind of intrigue us as we head into the offseason and start looking ahead to 25-26? And of course, we've got one more crack at our performers of the week still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. The NBA 82 game grind is done, and now the real fun has begun. The NBA playoffs are here, and it's time for all the high stakes drama, clutch moments, and jaw dropping plays. I am here for it. Knicks over the Celtics. Are you kidding me? If you're looking to make the playoffs even more exciting, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered as an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Try placing a bet on your favorite player's performance. Will they drop 30 points, 40, more? It's your call. Here's something special for first timers as well. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get 200 bucks in bonus bets instantly. Make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan, now that another OHL season is over, and for every team save the London Knights, who have that Memorial Cup to look forward to, the plotting begins for the season ahead. And I thought it would be fun for us just to take a look at one team from each conference that we find rather intriguing heading into this offseason and into the next regular season. Who jumps out at you in the Eastern Conference as interesting for whatever reason?
Well, I don't know if I took the cop out here, Mike, but for me, it's the Brampton Steelheads. And the reason being is there's just so many balls in the air there and so much turmoil. They didn't have the year that they had hoped to have. They were still good, still made a nice push in the playoffs, but just did not generate kind of the season they were expecting to have. And now all bets are off. We've heard Luke Mises going as one of their overage potentials is going to the NCAA. They're losing all the players that they're going to lose due to graduations as is. We've heard the rumors of Porter Martone with NCAA interest, Jack Ivankovic potentially. It feels to me like there's just so much up in the air there, and they need a year where they can kind of bounce back and draw more fans to that building. So I think they could. There's a lot of talent potentially there that they could make some noise, despite the step back they're likely to take. But for me, it's just that will be a very interesting storyline for me in the East this year, Mike.
I wouldn't call it a cop out at all. In fact, of the teams, and maybe it's because we talked about them quite a bit last week with those NCAA commitments and how difficult this makes it. And we got into it last week. We don't need to go over old ground here, but Brampton obviously would have been thinking about opportunities to move players in order to reacquire assets, etc. And they do. You're right. They need to somehow find a way to capture the attention of that market where they made very little in the way of waves even this year with such a good team. But one of the first teams that jumped out at me was, and when you started with Brampton and saying it's a cop out, I thought maybe, well, Niagara, because it's always a circus there, right? But I'm in a similar vein, but not going Niagara. For me, the intriguing team is in Brantford. And my heart stopped for
Yeah.
just a moment when you said Brampton, because I thought, oh my gosh, as usual, we don't prepare in advance and we're going to have the same team. But for me, it's Brantford because of the similar reasons. And I just alluded to Niagara. We talked about it on this show, Dan, when the Hymans kind of exerted their early influence and started to put their stamp on this team as new owners. And suddenly gone was Matt Turek. And you're wondering, well, okay, but this guy has had really a tremendous run and leaves the team in great shape, et cetera, et cetera. So my concern, and since we published that episode, I've heard from several people that said what you think is going on or how worried you are about things in Brantford doesn't even begin to see the other part of the iceberg, if you will. Like this is going to be messy. This is going to be ugly. That's what I'm hearing. I hope not, because I really like the market. I do. And the Hyman family said all the right things coming in. But if this just turns out to be something a la the Burks in Niagara before that family was done, yikes is all I can say. So I'm very interested. Who's going to be the head coach? Is Jay McKee going to stick around under this new regime? He was linked for a moment. I read some reports to the Philadelphia job before the Flyers made their final decision. So Anyway, I just think it's going to be really interesting. The team should be in very good shape next year in the Eastern Conference. But if ownership and slash the Hyman family is meddling too much or putting the wrong people in important places, I worry about what happens for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, no, very for everything you just said, I agree. And believe it or not, when we talked about this topic and who would intrigue us, I actually kind of had a short list of three teams in the East, and they were on it as well for all the reasons you just said. Um, and I mean, top of list for me is when you have a guy as solid as Matt Turek in place, and you can't come to an agreement with him, and now he's joining that Ottawa Senators franchise. The pipeline from Brantford to Ottawa continues. That's red flags for me. But yeah, everything you just said, they were on my intrigue list as well.
So you've got Brampton in the East. I think Brantford is interesting in the East. Some questions around that. What about the Western Conference, Dan? When you look at the 10 teams in the West, which team do you find most interesting as we head into this offseason?
All right. Well, don't hate me for this, people out there, folks.
Wait, is it the Kitchener Rangers, Dan?
You know what? They were my short list. I have my short list in the West as well, three teams. But I actually landed on the London Knights. And the reason I landed on the London Knights is we just talked about all these things, right? The dynasty, all these years making the championship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you look at that roster and say, graduations galore, right? Probably losing Barkey and Cowan to the minor pro ranks, losing the Overagers, Haltonen moving on. Dickinson might even stick in the show next year. Elliott, we talked about moving on. And you go down the list of all the losses and you say, how can a team like this still be good? And yet we always see London find a way. And so I always look at that roster and say, well, who's going to step into the void next year? And you look at the Noah Reeds, you look at Logan Howery coming in, you look at some of these players that are going to be really good. And to me, that's just an intriguing story because they're going to be good. And sometimes you can't figure out how. Everyone says, well, how are they going to be good? And they're going to. So the intrigue for me is, well, let's see. Let's figure out who that's going to be. So I think it's going to be interesting. Where will they land in that conference standings? I'm not ready to do our predictions yet, Mike, but I think it's going to be higher than people think.
I love what you just said, Dan, because as you were talking about it in my head, and then you basically said the same thing. They're going to be good, but how are they going to be good? And that's what makes it incredibly interesting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the mystery and starting to get a feel for how do they always do it. And that's what's going to intrigue me because they're going to do it. So let's start to figure this out, let's start to pull apart the recipe and dissect it. So I see plenty of intrigue there.
All right. I'm just going to make this clear to everyone with us as we head into the Memorial Cup, sticking through a whole season here on the OHL podcast. Your emails to ohlpodcast@rogers.com are going to be auto forwarded directly to Dan Mahar. Okay. I want it pinging in the middle of the night. Our listeners from Singapore and the Philippines, bring it all in to Dan's phone because I want you to directly hear the outrage from OHL fans in 19 other markets who figured now we're going to get London in a down year in 25-26.
I'll take it. Bring it on.
All right. Again, OHL podcast@rogers.com getting forwarded directly to Dan Mahar. For me in the West, the team that I find intriguing is the Owen Sound attack. Couple of reasons for that. So obviously we know, and we talked about this year when the dismantling of that team was basically official. We go back to that, dare I say, core four of Colby Barlow, Servac Petrovsky, Cedric Gandon, and Denny Gore, right? And everything was coming up roses, and this was the core around which the Owen Sound attack were going to build, and it just goes on. And it just, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. It didn't come to fruition in Owen Sound, and Gandon ends up having a terrific season with a Kingston team. This past year, Colby Barlow obviously gets to an OHL championship, et cetera, but that team had been broken down, dismantled, and by all accounts, Dan, even though Owen Sound struggled down the stretch, still made the playoffs, but was having a tough year for a while. Nobody was sure if they were going to make the playoffs. It seemed to find that blue collar identity that fans in Owen Sound can relate to, have kind of been hungry for, if you listen to the reporting out of Owen Sound. And the team, as it was constructed by the end of the season, and let's just give another nod to Pierce Bowie and what a tremendous rookie campaign he had, rewriting the rookie record books in Owen Sound. But this team endeared itself to the fan base. So I'm interested in this team in a very positive way. So now that you've got the identity that fans can get behind, the fan support's going to be there. How does this identity then continue to develop in Owen Sound? And what will these players be capable of? I think they've got a terrific coaching staff there,
Yeah.
starting with Scott Ray and working down. So interesting for sure. And the other thing that I find interesting, and we've alluded to it already, and it's an ongoing conversation with the NCAA and the implications of the rule change. Look, Owen Sound is the smallest market in the league. So how does this new landscape impact the Owen Sound attack? Michael Deck, Lenny Greenberg came to Owen Sound this season, but that tide seems to be shifting a little bit. And we know the all-out recruiting war is just getting started. So how does a team like Owen Sound compete in that new landscape? I'm really interested to see how this all plays out for them.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great choice too, because for all the reasons you just said, like despite finishing eighth in the conference and bowing out relatively quickly, things like you said did feel positive in Owen Sound this year. Like they took steps, their culture returned to where they wanted it. They have great young talent, but that Death Star we're seeing up in the sky of this NCAA uncertainty. And you look at a team like Owen Sound, we look at here in our hometown, Kitchener, Mike, you see all the renovations they're putting at the audit and as a recruitment tool to make sure their facilities can compete. And you look at a market like Owen Sound, say, well, they don't have the bankroll necessary to make those things happen. So how do they compete if, an NCAA team comes looking for Pierce Bowie in a year or two? And don't worry, I'm not suggesting he's leaving, folks, but I'm saying it's a challenge for a market like Owen Sound. And they're building other reasons for players to want to be there and stay there long term. And they've always succeeded that way. And I think that's really, really commendable. And I think that they could be a very strong force to be reckoned with very quickly in the Western Conference. So I love that choice.
I love the reference to the Death Star. Going back to what we said earlier, right? Every story needs a good villain. Darth Vader and the evil empire and the Death Star. Like that might be the greatest villain in movie history. So, and remember though, the Death Star had a vulnerability. So forget what Dan Mahar said before about the London Knights. They're going to be great again. There's a vulnerability. Dan just hasn't found it yet. Red 5 standing by. I am totally geeking out on a hockey podcast about Star Wars. I should just stop right here. All right. So Dan Mahar and I, are intrigued by the Brampton Steelheads and Brantford Bulldogs in the East, and by the London Knights and the Owen Sound Attack in the West. Love to hear from you about who it is you are intrigued by. Remember the email address. It's going straight to Dan's account, OHL podcast at Rogers.com. Let Dan know any hour of the day or night which team intrigues you for the season ahead. And also, we've still got more ahead on this episode of the OHL podcast. We have performers of the week to recognize, and every single person listening right now knows who the performer of the week was, right? So you can get your guess ready, see if it matches ours, plus a little bit more on the turning tide in the NCAA recruitment battle. Stay with us as we continue the OHL podcast. So Dan, just after we finished recording last week, I just want to touch on this a little bit more. And we were saying off the air before we started recording today that we could do this story every week because it's a constantly developing story. And we don't want to, if it's one thing we don't want to be on this show, it's boring.
Yeah.
However, just as we finished recording last week, within 24 hours, Malcolm Spence's name came up as another player, along with Luke Misa, who we've already talked about in this episode, Anthony Romani, Sam Hillebrand. These were all guys we talked about last week, leaving the OHL and making NCAA commitments. And so Malcolm Spence, I would think, was still very much a part of the Erie Otters' plans for next year and maybe even the year after. He's only draft eligible next month for the NHL. Like he's in this June's draft, probably a first rounder. And the challenge that is now presented to these teams, Dan, is how you build any sort of roster certainty, how you build a team. Because I guess what we can say with certainty is that the OHL cycle has been disrupted completely.
Yeah, I think the implications are going to take a couple seasons to figure out. But yeah, when you look at Malcolm Spence and very recently Christian Epperson also declaring he's leaving, both draft eligible players, which is a different dynamic, right? When you look at overage players going to the NCAA, that's to be expected at that age and whatnot. But these are NHL draft eligibles now potentially leaving, and you look at teams in those cases, Saginaw, Erie, who are a bit on the downside. So you see a player saying, I'm going to hang around for another year when we're probably going to be a bottom feeder. Am I going to go take a little bit of a cash infusion to go play in the NCAA? What concerns me is these aren't just the elite of the elite. This isn't Michael Misa and Porter Martone. This is very good players, but we're starting to get into a secondary tier here. And if those players start defecting, then yeah, you absolutely impact the overall caliber of the OHL, which has to be really concerning. And like you said, Mike, we've always been used to this cycle of team goes up, team drops. When team drops, they sell the couple veterans, they get picks, and they come back up more quickly. If they don't have that asset to move, to regain those picks, to rebuild quickly, it's going to be a lot tougher for some teams. If you don't have a Malcolm Spence to trade this year, where do you go to build quicker? So I think what the overall impact will remains to be seen, but obviously this is going to stunt the rebuilds of some of these teams, and it's going to put a lot more pressure on those front offices to find players and be creative to retain players. If you're a team that went for it and you're going to be on the decline, how's this going to impact you now? So in the go for it years, do you say, well, we might as well just trade absolutely everyone for all older players because these guys might defect anyway? There's all these kind of decisions you're going to have to make. So I think it's going to impact the OHL, and it's going to be a different dynamic than we've ever seen before.
I thought you made a great point last week, Dan, when we talked about this. And I brought in the idea of guidelines that would have to be implemented here to give teams greater roster certainty. But you made a great counterpoint to that when you said, hang on a second, though, if we're essentially talking about denying someone their livelihood or the opportunity to earn money, how do you really go about implementing those guidelines? So you gave me a lot to think about in that regard. And I think you're spot on with that counter argument. One thing I would say to counter your counter is these $250,000 offers that, for example, are reportedly being made to Porter Martone. I don't think, in fact, I'm quite certain in saying that not every player in the Canadian Hockey League is going to be made a top dollar offer like that. That will be reserved for rather exclusive, i.e., Porter Martone talent. But having said that, not to go over the old ground again, but let me put to you the impossible question here, Dan. And it's impossible. That's why I'm throwing it to you, because I think it is impossible. But what comes first here? Do we do we apply some sort of regulation around this new landscape, or do teams in the OHL figure out how to build in this new world? Because they'll have to if there aren't
Yeah.
guidelines, right? So is it going to are we going to have some guardrails, or are teams just going to figure out how to navigate these waters?
Well, yeah, and we're guessing, right? But like
Sure.
the way it looks like you'd have to figure out how to build is build around 16, 17, 18 year olds and hope the other teams are doing the same, which is not, I'm sure, what the league wants, because your 19-year-old players and some of your overages, they really bring up the talent level in your league. And so it's tricky to figure that out. And maybe you're going to start seeing some counter arguments here. If they can't impose guardrails, maybe the counter arguments are your best bet. So what I'm talking about here is you take a Porter Martone and you take these players like him, where the argument for the CHL has always been it's a fast track to the NHL for the top players. You can get there at 19, 20 years old when you're really elite in the CHL. You don't need to go play in the NCAA for a couple of years or the AHL. So if you say to Porter Martone, you're excelling in the CHL, you have been for a couple of years, your trajectory is on a clear upward trend, and you're going to get drafted very high in this draft, might even make the NHL next year, but maybe one more year, then you're in the NHL. So what do you have to gain other than some nil money by going to the NCAA? Because the schedule is going to set you back in terms of way fewer games. You're playing against older players. What if you don't have a great year? You know what you're getting in the CHL. You know where you're heading in the CHL. It's working. So you might see the counter argument to some of these players and their agents is, what do you have to gain by going there other than the money? Because it's a risk here, and there is a risk to leaping leagues at that point. So what I expect to see a bit, Mike, is some of those counter arguments, some of those non-financial incentives to remain in the CHL, because I think the CHL has a lot to offer, obviously, and you're going to start seeing them sell that hard.
I am so glad that I'm alive to see this development in major junior hockey. I really like, you think, Dan, about our past, right? We've seen playoff formats change. We've seen the league expand. We've seen divisions get realigned, things like this. But this is honestly like a landscape changing. It's a watershed moment in every sense of the word. And really the players right now are way ahead of the curve. They're the ones getting the offers. They're the ones saying, kind of dictating where they're going to play, where they want to play. It's absolutely fascinating. We know things will settle down, but how it all settles down, I haven't the foggiest right now. Like you said a moment ago, we're kind of just guessing at this, but what a wild time to be alive covering this great game.
It's true. It's really true. And I in my head I can't help but shake the feeling that it's going to be more negative than positive. So I'm trying to be more positive and think of ways that this might not be grim. And I just a reminder to all these kids and all these teams in every league is that the reason fans get behind you is because there's an identity in a group that you grow with, and too much transition, too much turnover, turmoil, that works against everybody. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to try and find solutions that kind of work for everybody. And I'm not optimistic, but we can hope.
All right, one more piece of business to take care of before we send you off to Rimouski for the Memorial Cup, and you can enjoy that. Of course, our performers of the week. I'll start with you, Dan. I'll remind everyone that we do not talk about these things in advance. So please, Dan, tell us why Casper Halttunen is your performer of the week.
And see, I was just about to say, Mike, I'm going to be a gentleman here and say I'm going to let you go again because I'm pretty sure we're going to have the same guy. So I came with a 1A and B. So should I defer to you to talk about Casper?
No, because I knew you were going to. So
okay.
I didn't go 1A, 1B.
Oh.
I just went complete. I've got B. No, actually,
Okay.
if I call this guy B, he will end me. I've got you're wrong, but tell us why you think Casper Halttunen is the performer of the week.
Well, okay. Well then okay. I'm gonna hold my B back till after you go, but I have a
You
B
got
and
it.
a reason why someone else makes a solid argument as well. But Casper Halttunen just like shot the lights out over the last week, do you not? Like every time I heard the goal horn go, I saw that number 12 skating away. So I think it was just like and just some ridiculous shots. I mean, the goal that jumps out in
Broke his
everyone's
stick.
well, the broken stick, yeah. And when Easton Cowan did the pirouette, dropped it to Helton, and then what people didn't appreciate about that play was because everyone's watching Easton Cowan, do the twirl and Heltonen's release, like what, like that's high end NHL release, like bang bang off and like zipped over the corner. So yeah, that's one where Jacob Oster, like what are you supposed to do about that? But yeah, that would be my argument for Halttunen for sure. And I do have a B, but I will let you go because I want to take it.
Let's just go back to for a second though to Johnny 807's email, okay? When he
Sure.
wrote to OHL podcast at Rogers.com about conspiracy theories. Hey, Johnny 807, you want a conspiracy theory? What the hell is Casper Halttunen doing playing in the Ontario Hockey League? Come on. Like, as Dan just said, that's ridiculous, ridiculous skill for this level. But nonetheless, yes, for everything you said, and then like this guy is just a scoring machine in the playoffs. He eats opposing goaltenders for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't think another choice, which is why, Dan Mahar, I decided to go this way. And I'm thinking of a performer, like a character actor. I thought Dale Hunter was at his absolute best in these playoffs. His reaction to some of the calls that were made and the reviews that didn't go London's way. Like Dale Hunter, I'm sure he's been memed, and I can't believe I'm old/young enough to be saying that and people understand what it means, but I'm sure he's been memed multiple times now. He's doing the old dive with the hand when he's holding up 5, insisting that things should be majors. And then to top it all off, Dale Hunter, once receiving the Gatorade shower as the championship coach, the the enthusiasm that this man's into his 60s, Dan, and it's like he had just won his first OHL championship. Oh, by the way, for those of you keeping track at home, it's his record fifth. The enthusiasm, that was this guy is as competitive as they come. He was as entertaining from behind the bench as they could get in this championship series. And Dale Hunter, damn it, is my performer of the week.
Well, you know what? That's amazing that you picked Dale Hunter. I like that. So you thought, like, how am I going to make sure we don't have the same guy? So you know what?
Exactly.
I am going with London Knights equipment manager. No,
No, go with Bob Martin, their security advisor. Come on, take your pick. Dale Hunter. Come on, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me any of what I said didn't make Dale Hunter incredibly entertaining these playoffs.
I've seen a lot of movies and TV shows over the past year, and I will say Dale Hunter's acting was right up there. So I like the pick.
All right. And then back to your B, because I sure as hell know it wasn't Dale Hunter.
It was not Dale Hunter, and I thought for sure Farwell's going to take Haltonen, so I wanted to have someone equally worthy. And so I'll keep it quick. I just want a little shout out to Sam O'Reilly, who I thought quietly was an incredibly key component of that team. Won the majority of his draws. Dale kept sending him out for all the key ones. Plus 24 in the playoffs, Mike. Who goes plus 24 in the playoffs? And I know you're going to say, well, Easton Cowan, but whatever. Sam O'Reilly's a draft eligible, and he went plus 24 with 22 points in 17 games, won all the key draws. Anyway, I just thought quietly, those are kids you don't hear a lot about, but the Medicine Hat Tigers, Rimouski Oceanic, and Moncton Wildcats are about to hear a whole lot about them very soon.
Dan and I, like you, will be keeping our eyes on the Memorial Cup. We'll focus on London, obviously, but as this podcast moves into its final chapter for another season, there will be the Memorial Cup. We're planning a collab with some buddies of ours on another OHL podcast. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. And Dan and I will stick around until the NHL draft to talk about the OHLers. It looks like, let's just tease that a little bit, Dan. Looks like a real good year for the O in the NHL draft, does it not?
Oh, that might be an understatement. It's going to be extremely top heavy on OHLers this year. So for OHL fans, it's going to be an exciting night towards the end of June for sure.
So hopefully you're still engaged in all of that. And Dan and I will keep coming at you every Tuesday to up until that point and keep you up to date with the OHLers and have some fun along the way as well. Hope also you're still engaged in the occasional 50-50 draw. You can't go to the rink unless you're going to be in Rimouski. If you are, great. Good luck on your 50-50s there. But if you're in Ontario, please support the 50-50 that supports the charity that I try to fundraise for, cystic fibrosis. Go to cf5050.ca, cf5050.ca. The jackpot is over $82,000 as we speak. It's only going to go up from there. So would love your support in that. And Dan and I will be back next week right here on the OHL podcast.